Hey guys, Seth with Flex Innovations here. Just wanted to do a quick video to show you how to assemble the FlexJet from out of the box. Before we get started here, I do want to point out we do have an awesome resource for everyone available. It's our Wiki page. It's located at wiki.flexinnovations.com. You can also find it directly from our website by going to Support and Product Support Wiki. On that website, on that location, we basically post everything, including build tips, latest information, manual addendums, anything related to all of our products, including the FlexJet and the Aura 8. There is some things in there posted that is not included in the FlexJet manual, so definitely check that out before we get started. So to get started, we just need some basic tools and glues and different accessories to help us with the build here. So as we take a look around the table here, you can see obviously we've got the manual. On the back of the manual, we actually have these little trim gauges for the elevators. So make sure you cut those out or print them out and cut them out from the website. Make sure you have those available for you. Of course, you need your transmitter and your receiver, whether you're flying Spektrum, Futaba, Graupner, whatever it may be. Make sure you have those available and ready, as well as your flight battery. We're using the Potenza 5200 milliamp 6-cell battery. You also need some epoxy. Anything like 5 to 10 minute epoxy is fine. We're using 15 minute in this particular example. Also need some medium CA and some accelerator. Accelerator is not necessarily needed, but it's certainly nice, helps speed up the process a little bit. You need either a pair of needle nose pliers or hemostats of some kind, just in case we lose any of the servo leads or anything down inside the fuselage. That'll help with some scissors, a Phillips head screwdriver, something to mix your epoxy on, so we've just got a piece of paper here for that, some masking tape, or painter's tape is also fine, and a couple little pieces of Velcro to mount our receiver and our battery. Okay guys, we're going to get into the radio setup portion here. If you're following along in your manual, this is on page 5. We're going to do a quick short segment on Spektrum, and then Josh is going to do a short segment on Futaba here. So if you're a Futaba user, you can go ahead and skip this. If you're Spektrum, you can also skip the Futaba section once we get there. For Spektrum, I'm using the IX12 here. Most radios are pretty similar to this as far as the programming, but some are slightly different. But this should cover the majority of people out there with the newer generation radios. Basically, we're just going to go create a new model. So I'm going to go up here to my model, and I'm going to create a new model. Just use the default option, airplane here, and create it. Let this create it. Okay, so now that we've got the model created here, we're going to go ahead and make sure we have it loaded. So it is actually currently active now. And we'll go back to the main screen here. So as you can see, we got the model loaded. I'm going to go ahead and name it. You guys can go ahead and do that too. I'll do that off camera here 1 second. Okay, now that we've got the basic model created and the model named, we're going to go into the system setup menu in the older radios, or like on this IX12, it's actually called the model setup menu. We're going to go into channel assign. And then once we're in channel assign, we're looking for the channel input configuration page. As you can see right there, channel input configuration. In some of the older radios, that is actually the second page within the system setup channel assign menu. Basically, the retracts work off of channel 5 gear, so you just want to assign channel 5 gear to a 2-position switch of your choice. In the case of Spektrum, channel 5 defaults to a 2-position switch on switch A. That's typically where most people fly the retracts, so I'm actually going to leave that there. The flight modes are controlled by channel 6 or aux 1, so all the pre-built flight modes move off of that. We want to assign that to a 3-position switch. You can assign that to any 3-position switch that you'd like. For myself, I prefer switch F, so I'm going to move that to switch F. And then that's all we need to do there. So we'll just back out of that. Okay, so now that we've done the channel assignment needed, we're just going to go into the model adjust or servo setup menu. So under model adjust, we have servo setup. And basically for here, for aileron, elevator, rudder, and gear, we do want to change the endpoints to 125. So right now we're on reversing, so let's go to travel. And aileron, we'll want to set to 125. Okay, so we've got our endpoints at 125 for both directions on aileron. We want to go ahead and do that for elevator, rudder, and gear. Now if you're following along in the manual on page 5, it actually says we want gear travels at 100. This is actually a mistake and something that was changed later on. We do want the travels at 125 for the gear. Okay, so now as you can see here, we've got the aileron set to 125, the elevator set to 125, the rudder, and the gear set to 125. We don't need to worry about aux 1 or channel 6 or the throttle at this time. We can leave those to 100. Okay, and one last thing I want to mention here about the radio setup is that if for some reason your 3-position switch works in the reverse direction that you would prefer for the flight modes, an example, if you typically fly with the switch up is high rates and down is low rates, but the flight modes come out where up is actually low rates and down is high, you can actually reverse channel 6 or aux 1 as I have done here, and that'll actually change the switch position for those flight modes. It's not necessarily required, but it's just something that's nice if you typically fly it in a different manner than the way it comes out of the box. One last thing I do want to mention to you guys, that is all that's required for the transmitter setup. This chart here that says Aura settings, reference only, is actually all the settings that are pre-programmed into the Aura. This is not needed to actually be put into your transmitter. This is just for your reference of what's pre-programmed in the Aura. Okay guys, so we're going to get the AR8010T and the Spektrum receiver here set up in the FlexJet. Basically I want to start off with kind of stating that there is 3 different receiver connection methods that you can use for Spektrum. The first and preferred method is the 8010T that uses a SRXL connection with 1 lead connecting the 8010T to the Aura. The second option and is secondly preferred is the 2 remote receiver connection. So basically you can take 2 of these satellite receivers and plug them directly into Aura. That method works as well. It's not quite as robust as an 8010T. These cables and little connectors tend to be a little brittle and sometimes aren't quite as reliable as the standard servo connector. And then the last method, which certainly works but is not preferred for the most part, is the PWM connection method. We're not going to cover PWM connection method in this video, but it is located on the bottom of page 7 of your manual. You do need some extra Y harnesses and male-to-male cables in order to connect that way. So it does complicate things a little bit and was one of the reasons it's not preferred. So like I said, for this install we're going to use the AR8010T, the 8010T telemetry receiver from Spektrum. So let's go ahead and get started. Basically I'm just going to go ahead and take the hatch off, just pull the latch back to the rear and lift the canopy off. And then basically up front you'll see I've already installed some Velcro for the receiver and also Velcro on the bottom of mine. But we're just going to set it right up front here. And I'm going to install the remote receiver here next to it. Basically we just follow Spektrum's guidelines for mounting there. So definitely check out your receiver manual for that information. Tuck the wires away a little bit there. And then we're basically going to take the male-to-male cable that was included with your FlexJet and we're going to plug it into the SRXL port of your receiver. So that basically goes right here on the top with the ground or negative wire towards the top as well. And then the other side of this cable actually plugs into Aura B port, which is on the far side here. It's the little standalone port in the Aura, and ground goes towards the bottom of the case or towards the tail of the airplane. Okay, and now that that's in, since we are using the AR8010T receiver, we do recommend that we unplug the throttle or ESC from the Aura and plug it straight into the receiver. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Just going to remove the throttle here, and I'm going to take and install it into the 8010T. Okay, so now we got the throttle lead in there. Just a quick tip, sometimes these cables or these receivers are a little tight on the servo plug side, so if you do have a little trouble getting it plugged in there, sometimes you can take a little file or a small piece of sandpaper and kind of sand the corners of the connector a little bit, and it'll make it go in a little bit easier. But so we've got that installed now, and basically what we need to do is start the bind process. So basically with these 8010T receiver, it's very simple. We've just got a little bind button on it. Thanks to Spektrum, we no longer need the bind plug on this. So I'm going to have Josh give me a hand here and hold down the bind button while I plug in the receiver. So plug this in and we should get fast flashing orange lights on the receiver. And we do. Josh can let go now. Okay, so now the 8010T and the remote receiver connected to the 8010T are flashing fast orange. So that tells us we can go ahead and hit the bind button on our transmitter. Just follow your transmitter's instructions for its particular bind process. And it says successfully bound. And now you can see the satellites and the receiver is solid orange. The aura is going through its auto detect process. So basically, once we have made a successful receiver connection with the aura, we should get a solid orange and solid green LED. That tells us that the aura is receiving valid receiver data, indicated by the green light, and the aura is on and calibrated properly, indicated by the orange light. At this point, we have control of everything, and we're ready to begin setup of the elevators. One thing I did want to mention, sometimes it's a little hard to see here in the camera, but the LEDs on the aura are definitely solid orange and solid green once the receiver is bound and working appropriately. If you do not have solid orange and solid green on the aura, just repeat the process until you get those. As another quick note, some Spektrum transmitters like to be bound at different distances from the receiver, so if you do have troubles binding, try moving the radio 10 feet away or so from the receiver and repeating the bind process.
Josh here. We're going to be setting up the Futaba radio system with the FlexJet. I've got my trusty 18SZ here with the 2001 SB receiver. We're going to be using SBus to program this and connect, so we're going to be following page 6 of the manual. With just a note on receivers before we get started too far, I'm using the 2001 SB for this installation, which is an SFHSS receiver. It's one of my favorite receivers for 60 size and below airplanes. Just makes installation really simple. For fast users, we recommend the 6303 SB receiver. For fastest users, we recommend the 7008 SB receiver. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm on a different model right now, so I'm going to set up a new model with the S18 SZ. So I'm going to go to Model Select, and then I'm going to assign a new model. Select yes. One friendly reminder, when you set up a new model with this radio, is it's going to use whatever protocol you previously were using. In this case, I was using TFHSS, so we need to switch it to SFHSS because that's what the 2001 SB receiver uses. So now I'm going to go to my linkage menu. I'm going to go to System Type, select SFHSS, and then I'm going to confirm that. And you'll see it'll switch over now. Now that I have the protocol selected, the first thing we're going to do is make sure our switch assignments are correct, and that's located in the function menu. So I'm going to select linkage menu, and I'm going to go to function. And this is the default wing type that's set up. We don't need to assign 2 ailerons or anything like that. We want the most basic. So we've got aileron, elevator, throttle, rudder. Gears on channel 5, which is what we want, and then channel 6 is defaults to air brake. We're going to go ahead and select a different function for that, so I'm just going to assign this to aux2. So I'm going to hit my page 2, and I'm going to just do aux2. You could use any of the auxes just fine, it's not going to matter. Aux2 is just the first one that I grabbed. And then I want to assign this to whatever switch I want to use for my flight modes. My particular preference is the SE switch. So I'm going to select the switch, go to SE, and then go back to hardware select. So now we've got aileron, elevator, throttle, rudder, gear, aux2, and then we've got our default controls set up. Okay, so now that we have our switches in the right position, we just want to confirm that with the servo monitor. Servo monitor is on basically any popular radio, Futaba, Spektrum, it doesn't matter, and it's going to be one of the most helpful tools in making sure everything's working properly. So first thing we want to look at is channel 5, it's our gear. It's on a 2-position switch, and as we move it, we can see our monitor moving it. And then channel 6, which is aux2, that's my 3-position switch for flight modes. As I flip my switch, we can see that it's moving here as well. You can also see it moving on channel 11, but that's not going to really affect us at this point in time, so we can just leave that be. The next thing we are going to need to do is assign our endpoints. So what we want to see in Aura is that we want to see 125 for aileron, elevator, rudder, as well as the gear. So in our linkage menu in Futaba, we're going to go to endpoints, and then we're going to adjust this. So aileron is first up, and we're going to adjust the travel to 125, 125. Now I'm adjusting elevator. We'll do the same 125, 125. Rudder, 125. Now gear was something that we need to adjust as well. This needs to be 125, 125. In the manual, it does specify 100, 100. This was a change that actually happened to us after the manual was written. So 125, 125 is correct. You can also confirm that on the Wiki page. The one thing to note is that our throttle is still at 100, 100, and aux2, which we're using for our flight modes, is 100, 100. Now that we've got that assigned, the radio is basically set up. The last thing that we'll do real quick is we'll add a timer. We recommend 4.5 minutes for the 5200 milliamp battery, which is what we're testing, what we have right now. So we'll go to linkage menu, timer. I like to assign my timer down, so we'll start with 4.5 minutes. There we go. I like to set my timer as down, and then vibration, we'll leave that off. Now the reset switch, I personally use my right dial, which is RD. That's totally personal preference there. Okay, now that we have our reset, I'm going to go ahead and assign the start switch. So I'm going to select here, and I'm going to use J3, which is our throttle stick. So now that J3 is assigned, I'm going to go to my set. I'm going to move my throttle stick up just a hair, and then I'm going to hit the on-off switch button. And this is that's going to set the timer. Now, as you can see, the red is here, which is timer off, and then green is timer on. That's backwards from what we want, so we're going to reverse the timer. Now we have it properly. So if I go back to hardware select again, this takes us back to the timer menu. As you can see, when I move my throttle stick up, my timer begins. When my throttle stick's down, it stops. And then if I just spin my right dial, it puts us back at 430, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so timer's done, endpoints are set, our functions are set, so the radio is ready to go. All we need to do is install our receiver, and we should be off to the races. Okay, now that we have the 18SC programmed, we're going to go ahead and install this 2001 S-Speed receiver. So up here we have the hatch latch, just pull it back and the hatch will lift up. And then we're going to plug in our S-Bus cable, the male-to-male servo lead into S-Bus. And in the case of the 2001 SB, the signal wire goes to the outside and ground goes to the inside. So we're going to go ahead and install this. We have the receiver spot here, which is marked. We've already put the Velcro in for you, so just press that here. And then we're going to plug this into the B port of the Aura, which is up at the top right corner in this case. And signal wire is going to go to the inside. So we're going to just press that in. Maybe. Okay. Now, as I had mentioned, we would prefer that the throttle be plugged into the receiver itself. So that's in port 1 of the Aura. I'm going to go ahead and pull this cable, and then we're going to plug that in here. In the case of into port 3 of the receiver, in this case, both ground wires are towards the inside of the receiver, and then the signal wires are towards the outside of the receiver. Last thing we have to do here is we're going to just clean up our wire installation. I personally like to use 3M, the dual lock, to hold the receiver wires, but we just want to have these so that they're 90 degrees from each other. So once we get those to sit in correctly, the receiver installation is ready to go. So the last thing that we need to do is bind the receiver to the transmitter. So in the case of the 2001, there's a link button here, and I think we can finagle this. So I'm going to get the wire set up, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to press and hold the link button on the receiver, and I'm going to apply power to the airplane. Let go of the link button, and the LEDs will go from blinking green to hopefully solid green. Let's see here. So now that we have solid green here, you can see Aura is doing an auto detection to find the valid signal input. Now it's grabbed on, it's seeing a signal, it's going through the boot process to confirm. And if you give it a second, we'll get a solid green and a solid orange light, which we have here. Just a side note, it's really difficult in the camera to see solid green and solid orange, but it's definitely there. So as you can see, we have a solid green light on our receiver, and then we have solid green, solid orange on the Aura 8. Binding is complete. We have function of everything. We can hear servos move. So at this point, we're going to hand it back to Seth to finish up the assembly of the FlexJet. Just a friendly reminder, definitely check out, if you have any questions, definitely see our wiki page. We'll have some helpful hints for Futaba installation. Also on page 7 is the PWM setup for Futaba. We also do allow you to use PWM, which is for the older radios. You do lose some functionality of Aura, plus it's a little more wires and you need wire harnesses and stuff like that. So we definitely prefer S-Bus, but if S-Bus isn't available to you, you can absolutely use PWM. And then, of course, if you have questions, definitely see our wiki page.
Okay, so now we're going to prep for the elevator flying stab installation here. So there's a couple little things we need to do on this to prep for that. If you're following along, this is on page 9 of the manual. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to remove the 2 bottom screws on the bottom hatch for the fan and remove the rear nozzle as well as the thrust tube. Basically all you need for this is just a basic Phillips screwdriver. So we're just going to remove these 2 screws. And remove the hatch. And then from here we're going to remove the 2 screws that hold the nozzle on the tail of the airplane. So just 1 screw on each side, both Phillips screws. And these you really don't even have to back out completely. You can just get them off far enough that the nozzle will come off by itself. And there we go. You can just set that aside. Okay, so now that the nozzle's off the tail of the airplane, we're just going to pull a little piece of tape off of the tailpipe and fan. If it is not taped, no big deal. But for those that it is taped, we're just going to remove that. Now basically there is a small side and a large side to the tube. The large side is on the fan side, so we just want to make sure we keep our orientation for that because it'll make things easier when we go to reinstall it later. So when we pull this out, it's a little bit tricky, but basically when we pull it out, we want to roll the tube into itself in kind of a U shape. You can take a look at the drawing on page 9 of the manual. It kind of gives you a brief description, a pretty good picture there of what we're trying to accomplish. But basically we're just going to slide this tube, this thrust tube off the back of the fan. And then once we're far enough out, we're just going to roll the tube into this U shape and slide it right out. And you can kind of see that U shape we've rolled it into. Like I said, the big thing here is we just want to try to avoid creasing it. If you do, it's not the end of the world, but it is nice to try to keep everything nice and square. Whenever you release this, it does want to pop open, so just kind of release it easily so it doesn't fly out of your hands, and then set this aside. Just remember which side is the small diameter and which side is the large diameter for reinstallation. Okay guys, so we're going to get on to the horizontal stabilizer installation. For those of you following along with your manual, this is on page 10. Basically, we're going to need a few items to complete these steps. The first thing is your center indicators for your horizontal stabilizers. This is located on the back cover of your manual, or if you've printed them off online version, make sure you have them cut out and ready to go. You need your control linkage for both stabs, so there will be 2 linkages in total. Your control arm. 2 of those, 1 for each stab, your control arm retaining screw, 2 of those, and your Allen key that was provided with the kit. Along with that, you'll need some blue thread lock, some masking tape or low-tack tape of some kind, a Phillips screwdriver, and some hemostats or needle nose pliers that can assist in this small space. Okay, so the first thing I like to do before we go too far is I like to just verify that this retaining screw for the pivot is actually tight and secure. You can take a Phillips screwdriver and check that there, make sure it's tight. Ours is tight. If you'd like, you can also back it out, put a little bit of CA in there to help make sure it's secure. This one in particular I've checked and it's secure, so we'll set that aside for now. I'm going to go ahead and put the rest of our tools aside that we don't need at the moment. And we'll basically get started with our control linkage and control arm and screw. Basically, this is one step that was missing in the manual. It's something that changed after we had printed the manuals, but this linkage was expected to have come installed on the servo arm, but it's actually not in the production kit. So if you follow along on the wiki page, this information is there, but also I'll mention it to you here in this video. basically the linkage installs onto the control arm, not to be confused with the servo arm, but the control arm in the outermost hole. So go ahead, just open the clevis and slide it over the outermost hole there, and make sure the clevis snaps in the back completely closed. From here, we're going to install the other side onto the second from the innermost hole. So basically counting 2 holes out from center on the servo arm, we're going to put the clevis in that hole. Before we get down in there though, I do like to go ahead and put a little bit of blue thread lock on the threads and clevises to make sure that they are retained and secure and don't back out after we've installed them during our flights. So I'll go ahead and put a little bit of blue thread lock on here. Put some there, and I also like to get some just down on the end of the rod here, down inside the clevis, and be sure to do both ends here. Okay. Alright, now that that's done, I'm going to secure the cap. And now from here, this is one of the little more challenging parts, but I promise you it's certainly possible. But basically, like I said, we're going to install the clevis on the second from innermost hole. So if we count out on the servo arm, we're going to go 1, 2. That's the holes that the clevis needs to be installed in. For some people, it may actually be easier to remove the servo arm screw and remove the servo arm. But sometimes that can complicate things a little bit more, as you have to use the small Allen key to tighten the servo screw back up. So for us, we're going to just go ahead and make sure the clevis is opened up and ready to be installed. And we're going to slide it in through here. I like to rotate the servo arm just slightly forward to make it a little bit easier. And I apologize, this may be a little bit hard to see for you on camera, but we will install this over the servo arm. Okay, so I got the clevis over the servo arm there in the second hole out. So I just want to make sure that the clevis is clipped in properly on the back side here to make sure it's fully secure. So I'm just going to take my hemostats here and just take a little squeeze of it there. And there we go, we're good there. Okay, now that we've got the linkage snapped onto both the control arm and the servo arm, we need to take our little center indicator here and tape it into place so we have a reference point when we go to install the stab. So basically just make sure you see the front towards the front, you have the left or right depending on which one you're working on, and top and bottom and the rear of the airplane. So basically the center line here just aligns with the panel line in the side of the fuselage. So we're just going to align it here. You can see the panel line carries over the top, and just go ahead and fold it here. So I'm going to take a piece of our masking tape and tape the top piece down here, and take another piece of masking tape and tape it around to the bottom side here. Fold that around. And now you can see this line here indicates where stab center should approximately be. We're just going to flip the airplane over so we can take a look down inside and show you guys the other angle when we're installing the servo arm, or excuse me, control arm retaining screw. Okay, so now to actually install the stabilizer, the first thing you want to make sure is your radio and the receiver is powered on, so you have control of the elevator servos and they're centered appropriately. So as you can see here, just do a quick wiggle, and we're all centered and powered on here. So I have my radio off site just for reference. You don't necessarily need to see that in screen here, but we're just going to insert the stab through the bearing in the side of the fuselage. Just double check, make sure you kind of hold the bearing in place so you don't accidentally push it out or anything. So I'm going to reach in here and hold that in, and there we go. We're slid in. You can see the stab rotates freely on the bearing there. And also now the actual root of the control rod from the stab is also sticking through the inside of the fuselage. Now here's where it's pretty important. We want to go ahead and install the control arm on the stabilizer. So let me flip this control arm around and see if I can get it installed here. I apologize if I'm in the way of the camera. Okay, so there's just kind of a quick test fit, and I'm going to roll this over here, see if our camera guy can get the stab indicator here. And so now you can actually see we're actually pretty much perfect on the indicator here. So if you are off a little bit, you want to shorten or lengthen that clevis until the leading edge of the stab lines up with that little hash mark there. We're pretty much perfect, so we don't need to make any more adjustments. So I'll go ahead and flip the stab, or flip the fuselage back over. Okay, now that we know we have the horizontal stab centered with that little hash mark, we're going to go ahead and take our little Allen head self-tapping screw and our little tiny Allen key and go ahead and secure the arm to the pivot of the stab. I do want to mention that the pivot of the stab, the screw does go into plastic, so we do not recommend using any kind of Loctite, as that will weaken the plastic structure where the screw is retained into. So go ahead and take this and push it into the control arm. And just thread this all the way in until it's completely tight. Okay, so now that we've got that screw secured, I just want to double check and make sure that we're still located at center on our little indicator here on the side, which we are. So everything looks great there. And basically we're just going to repeat the same process for the right stabilizer. Okay, so we've got both stabs installed now, and we went ahead and removed the little center line indicators there. So just do a quick function check, make sure everything's working appropriately, and double check and make sure the stabs are even left and right. That's pretty important with this particular airplane. So it looks like ours is functioning appropriately, and we'll go ahead and move on to the next step. Okay guys, so we're moving on to page 12 of the manual for those of you following along. This is really actually pretty simple. This is something common you guys will do if you need to take the wings off for storage or for transport. But basically we're just going to install the wings. You can install the missile rails at this time if you'd like, but generally speaking those tend to get in the way and can easily be broken. So we just leave those off until the airplane's completely done. So basically you'll just need a Phillips screwdriver, your 2 wing screws, and your 4 wing tubes. Just make sure that you have the 4 larger tubes, the smaller diameter, shorter tubes for the vertical fin. So just make sure you have the appropriate tubes and the appropriate screws. Okay guys, one other little quick tip for you just to help the longevity of the airplane and whatnot. These plywood mounts do come glued in from the factory, but it's always a good idea just to go over with a little bit of CA just to make sure it's secured. So I'm just going to run a little tiny bead here in the corner. Just make sure you don't use too much that the wing won't fit on, but we're just going to use a little bit of CA here and just run it along the corner. And a little way around here. And then just repeat that for the other side. You can even use a little bit of accelerator if you'd like to help make the process go a little faster, but it's always also good to let it wick in a little bit before you use the accelerator. So basically we're just going to insert the short tube into the leading edge of the wing. Just make sure it seats fully in there. There we go. And the long tube into the trailing edge side. And there we go. You can also see the tube locations through these little slots here to confirm they're in the right place. So basically we're just going to slide this on, and before we get it on all the way, we'll want to connect the aileron servo. So let me get this slid on here. Okay, we started there, and we'll connect the aileron servo lead. And just make sure to guide it in as you push the wing in. We don't want to get any pinched wires or anything in here. So just kind of work this in. And once you have the wing fully seated, you should be able to see the little slot through the hole there for the servo, or for the retaining screw. So basically we're just going to take our retaining screw, drop it down into the slot here, and use our Phillips screwdriver to tighten it in place. And that's all there is to it for the wings. Just repeat the same process on the other side, and we'll see you once we have that complete. Okay, so we got both wings on now, and basically we're just going to power on the airplane and verify that the ailerons are centered. If they're not, go ahead and turn the clevises in or out as needed to center them. Just match them here at the tip where they meet the wing there. And once they're centered, just put a little drop of blue Loctite on each of the clevises, and we'll move on to the next step. Okay guys, now we're going to move on to page 13 of the manual, which is installing the vertical fin. Basically all we're going to need for this is some 10 or 15 minute epoxy, your mixing cup or something to mix it on, and a mixing stick like a popsicle stick or something like that. You may need a little file or something if you need to make any adjustments to the vertical fin, but we're going to test fit everything first to see how the alignment looks and then go from there. So the first thing I like to do with this is we're basically going to take the vertical fin carbon tube and just do a quick test fit down inside the fuselage. The main thing we're looking for here is that it goes through both the upper and the lower plywood mounts. As long as it's getting through both of those, that's really what matters. On the manual, we do state to put a little piece of foam tape or masking tape on the bottom, on the inside there, but on our particular production model here, there's actually foam there, so that would actually stop the tube. But like I said, just make sure it goes all the way through to both plywood mounts. Like right now it's only in one, and just make sure it goes through to that second mount like that. So it all fits good there. So the next thing I like to do is just double check and make sure it fits into the fin appropriately. So I just slide it into the vertical fin and everything fits there as needed as well. So from here, I'm just going to go ahead and remove it from the fin and install it into the fuselage, making sure we're in both of those plywood mounts. From here, we'll go ahead and slide the fin on. And remove the little tape holding the extension down for the rudder. And plug our rudder servo in. We're not going to do any tests with the rudder servo at the moment, but the only way it'll fit is with that fin in place, or with that extension in place. So go ahead and slide the vertical fin all the way down, making sure to guide the extension into the fuselage as well, and fully seat it to the fuselage. Again, just double check, make sure it doesn't go all the way through the inside of the fuselage. From here, we're going to go ahead and take the rudder, or the vertical fin retaining screw, and start it in place. Okay, so just finish tightening this screw down here to secure the fin, and that is secure. Just double check, make sure that tube still hasn't pushed through there. You just want to make sure it doesn't interfere with the tailpipe. From here, basically we're going to sight down the wings in the fuselage to make sure the fin is even between each wing and perpendicular to the way to the wings. The wings do have a little bit of anhedral, so they actually angle downward slightly, so they may not be perfectly perpendicular to an individual wing panel, but it should be down the middle of both wings. So we're just going to sight down that, and if we need to make any adjustments, we'll pull the vertical fin off and do some filing on the inside of the plywood mounts there where the tube sits. Okay, so as you can see here, we're just kind of sighting down the tail. Like I said, we just want to make sure it's kind of vertical and perpendicular to the center line of both wings here. Like I mentioned before, the wings do have a little bit of anhedral in them, so make sure you're not basing it off one wing panel. Make sure you are basing it off the average between the two. So whenever you're looking at this, it's always a good idea, if you can, to step back 10 to 15 feet and look at it from a little bit of a distance. It'll help you see things a little bit better. But essentially we're just looking for this angle here to make sure it looks appropriate and to make any adjustments or changes that we need to do. Our vertical fin here is actually really close, so we don't need to make any adjustments to it, and we're going to go ahead and pull the fin off and get ready to start gluing the carbon tube into the fuselage. Okay, so we've gone ahead and removed everything from the fuselage here. Basically we're going to go ahead and get all of our supplies we needed to glue the vertical fin tube into the fuselage. Of course, we need our Phillips screwdriver, the retaining screw, a little piece of sandpaper. This can be like 320 or 400 grit. It doesn't have to be anything super abrasive. We're just going to lightly scuff the tube. Something to mix your epoxy on and something to mix the epoxy with. Of course, we also need some masking tape just to make sure we hold everything in place while the glue dries. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and test fit the carbon tube in here like we did before. Just make sure that it goes through the second plywood mount, and then I'm just going to take a little mechanical pencil here and mark where the tube goes into the fuselage. I'm going to remove it, and now I have that little reference mark on the tube. Basically, I'm going to take my little piece of sandpaper here, and I'm just going to lightly scuff this area below the line that actually goes into the fuselage. Like I said before, we're not trying to massively change the shape or anything here. We're just trying to give it a little scuff to help the glue secure the tube in place. So nothing too major. Lightly doing the sanding here will do. Okay, so we did that. And take a little paper towel with some water or some isopropyl alcohol or something and just wipe the excess carbon dust off of it. And then we'll be ready to start the gluing process. Okay, so I'm going ahead and mixing our epoxy here to prep for the glue process. So I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of glue here. It's important just to make sure that this is an even amount between the hardener and the epoxy itself. So I'm going to go ahead and get this mixed up and we'll be right back. Okay, so now that I've got the epoxy mixed here, I'm just going to take and apply a tiny bit to the inside of the plywood mounts. Make sure you get it on both of the mounts. And then I'm also going to just take and just very lightly apply some to the bottom of the mount, or the bottom of the carbon tube that goes into the fuselage. Like I said, we don't need a ton of this here. We're just looking to secure it in place and not splooge epoxy everywhere all over the fuselage. Wipe away a little excess. And then we'll go ahead and get ready to insert this. So we're just going to go ahead and insert this into the mounts. Just do a little bit of twisting action to make sure it kind of goes in there evenly and we get the glue all the way around the tube. This is a good time to actually go ahead and take a paper towel and wipe up around that to make sure it doesn't actually glue the fin to the fuselage. And so we're going to wipe that up and then get the fin installed, and we'll be right back. Alright, so I'm just securing the fin as we said there and tightening the screw down. And just like we did when we test fit everything, we're just going to sight down the back of the vertical fin to make sure everything is nice and square. And I'm going to step back here, sight that in, and then add a little bit of tape to hold it in place. So I'm just going to stick a little piece of tape here like this. And one more on the other side. Just double checking this, and it looks like we're pretty even, so we're going to let that sit there and dry, and we'll see you in about 10 minutes. Okay, so now that the glue is done drying here, we went ahead and removed the fin just to make sure that everything was loose and free, and reinstalled it again. Basically, we're going to go ahead and power up the airplane. Our airplane is actually on right now, and we're just going to make sure the rudder is centered. Just as a point of reference, the counterbalance here is not always the good place to reference whether the rudder is straight or not. So we recommend kind of getting behind the airplane like we did when we sighted the vertical fin for its left to right roll angle. We're going to do the same thing here, but for the rudder deflection left and right. So basically just step back, take a look at it. Ours is actually really straight here, so we're good on ours. And once you have the clevises adjusted to where you need to get the rudder straight, just apply a little bit of blue thread lock as we did with the other clevises. So I'm going to come in here and just put a little blue thread lock on each side and on here. Okay, and that would be it for the rudder. Okay guys, so now we're on page 15. We're going to finish up the tail section here and get the tailpipe or thrust tube installed into the fuselage. This is a little bit tricky, but it's fairly straightforward. Basically, just remember which end is the large end. That's the side we want towards the fan. But just like we removed it, we're going to put it into a little bit of a U shape. Make sure you don't crease it, just kind of roll it in on itself. And we're going to push this up in here, get it up as far as you can before you let it unfold. And gently start unfolding it. And there we go. And now it's a little bit tricky part. We just want to make sure it gets up over the fan all the way around. So make sure it's on the top, the sides, everywhere is all around. So if you've got small enough hands, you can actually stick your hand up the tailpipe and kind of massage it around this way. If not, then you may have to use something like a paint stick or a stick of balsa or something similar to get it to go. But as you can see there, just a little twist of the pipe, and now we're over the fan unit. Okay, so now that we have the tailpipe over the fan unit, we're going to go ahead and install the little rear fuselage fairings. The one thing that I did notice here when we went to install these is they didn't quite fit appropriately, so we just need to take and trim the outside edge of them a little bit here. So I'm just going to take about 1/8 of an inch or so off the outside edge, like that, and then just test fit and make sure everything fits appropriately, just like that. So now that I know it test fits okay, I'm going to go ahead and take some medium CA. You can use any kind of CA, it does not have to be foam safe with EPO foam. And I'm going to apply CA over the part. You don't need a ton of it. This is not a structural or any kind of important piece here. We just don't want it falling off in flight, so just get all the glue on there. And the one simple thing that I do like to do is I like to take a little bit of kicker, and I go ahead and spray a little bit of kicker on the joint where I'm actually placing the item. Now if you do that, just note that it's going to dry rather quickly once you press it on there, so you just want to get it on and held in place rather quickly. So I'm going to get that there, have it held in place, and we should be drying here very shortly. And then just repeat the same thing for the other side. Okay, so now that we got the trailing edge of the fuselage or fuselage fairings or whatever you want to call them on, we can go ahead and install the nozzle. So basically this will only go on one way. The little mounts are actually offset towards the top of the fuselage. So just slip this over the tailpipe and over the fairings and the tail end of the fuselage, and use your Phillips screwdriver to tighten everything down. Be careful not to over tighten it. We don't need to go all He-Man. This is just an aesthetic part, but also gives the tailpipe some support. So just get them down pretty snug, and do that here. Do the other side. It's nice to tighten them even, left and right, tighten them down kind of together. That way you don't strain anything at an awkward angle. Okay, now that that's tightened down, what we're actually going to do is actually set the depth of the inner thrust tube or tailpipe. Basically, we kind of want the tailpipe more or less flush with the end of this exhaust nozzle here. So I'm just going to take and kind of grab my thumb on the inside of the tailpipe and just kind of pull it away while I kind of push back here. And if you can kind of see on the back edge here, we're pretty well flush. So now that we're flush, we're just going to take and retape. So we're going to take our little 2 pieces of tape that were included, and we're going to apply it as far to basically 9 3 as we can. So it'll probably be a little bit closer to 10 2, but basically just push this down in here, and be sure to rub that down all the way around as far down the side as you can, and put one more on the other side. You may need to move the little elevator servo extension out of the way a little bit. And same thing there, just make sure it's all the way secured down on both sides. Go ahead and wrap that elevator extension back down in there. And then from here, we're pretty much done with the end. We're going to go ahead and install the rear hatch. It'll only fit one way. One side is curved more than the other. The curved side goes towards the tail. Let's press that on. And we'll take our 2 Phillips head screws and secure them back in the fuselage. And that's it for the tailpipe installation. Okay, so one of the last steps here in the assembly process is just gluing the missile rails onto the wingtips. The missile rails can be fairly fragile, so before you glue it, if you want to add any stiffening or any tape or barbecue skewers or anything to them, now's a good time to do it before we glue them on. But otherwise, basically we're just going to take and put a little bit of glue inside the slot here. This is just medium CA. Again, no need for foam safe or any special glues. But just run a little bit down inside the slot. I like to put just a little bit around the edge here too. And then we're just going to push this on. And just make sure we press it on all the way so it's secure. And basically you can use some accelerator at this time and just repeat the process for the other side. Okay guys, one of the pre-flight checks we like to do on all of our airplanes is just verify all the hinging is good and solid. We just want to make sure we don't have any hinge issues or have hinges come out in flight. So basically we're just going to do a little tug on the surfaces and the wing just to make sure that the hinges are in good. We don't need to, gorilla strength this, try to pull them apart super hard. We just want a good firm pull. So I'm just going to kind of take and pull here. Nothing coming loose. Nothing coming loose, so this vertical fin is actually really good. If you do happen to have one come loose, they're just regular CA hinges, so you can just take any medium or thin CA and glue the hinges right back in and they'll hold up pretty well. So anyway, we'll repeat that test for the ailerons and then we'll get the airplane all assembled and ready to go. Okay guys, one of the other pre-flight checks we're going to do here is just go ahead and swing the gear. Keep in mind this gear does need to be armed before it actually will swing appropriately first with the sequencer. So basically all we're going to do is move the gear switch to one position and then back to the other, and we're just going to pause about, about 1 second or so in between switch positions. So I'm just going to move the switch and then pause and then move it back. Wait for everything to close. And then we're good to go from here. So go ahead and extend the gear. And now the gear is fully extended. Basically from here, we're just going to look down inside each of the gear bays and just make sure that there's no wires or any kind of wiring or anything that might catch the landing gear to keep it from getting stuck in the up position. So just go over it, look, verify, make sure everything's tucked away nicely and neatly. Looks like everything's pretty good on our airplane. So we're going to go ahead and set it up on its gear and finish the last inspection here to make sure we're ready to fly. Okay guys, 2 more checks here before we make a maiden flight on this guy. We're just going to do a quick control direction test, make sure all the controls respond appropriately for the stick inputs, and then we're also going to do a sensor direction test. Basically, we want to just check, make sure the controls are working appropriately, and if that passes, we'll go on to the sensor check. So I'm just going to move the ailerons, so right aileron, that works right, left aileron, that works right, up elevator, down elevator, left rudder, and then right rudder. Note that there is mixing with the rudder, with the elevator and the aileron. So that is perfectly normal. That's designed for knife edge, but all the controls are working appropriately. And so the next thing we just need to do is the last final check is just do a quick sensor check. If for some reason your airplane does not pass a control direction test, please contact us for further support. There may be something wrong or incorrect with the aircraft. We just want to make sure you don't have any problems whenever you take off for the first flight. So for the sensor direction test, basically we're just going to take the airplane and pick it up as if it were flying and maneuver it in a way that tells us which way the gyro is reacting. So for the rudder, it's actually pretty easy. We're just going to take and kind of lift the nose gear off the ground and move the nose to the left. The rudder should move to the right in order to correct that. So we got right rudder correction for that, and if we go back the other way, we should see the opposite. So when we move the nose to the right, we should get left rudder to correct it. And we do, so that's all correct. And same thing for the elevators. So whenever we go to the nose down position, we should see it correct with up elevator, and we do. And when we go to the nose up position, we should see it correct with down elevator, and we do. So that's correct as well. And same thing with the ailerons. When we roll the airplane right, it should apply a left aileron correction. So the left aileron should come up. It does. And then the same thing when we roll the airplane to the left, the right aileron should come up. And it does. So all the sensor direction tests and control direction tests pass. And that means we're ready to fly. You can also just double check and make sure your flight modes are working appropriately on your switch. Just hold full up elevator and move your switch, and you should see the rates change when you move the switch, and that'll tell you that your flight modes are working appropriately as well. Thank you guys for taking a look at this video. We hope that it was informative and helped you guys assemble your FlexJets. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact us through the contact form on our website or leave them in the comments down below. Thanks guys, have a good day.